Welcome back, everyone, to the Homeric Epic Podcast. The first buds are swelling on the trees, and things are beginning to thaw where I live. The groundhogs, in their infinite wisdom, have foreseen more weeks of winter, though. But you know where it isn't winter? On the plains of Troy. Oh, no. We're in the midst of the Iliad's longest day, which, now that I think about it, I'm not actually sure which season the Iliad takes place in. I should find that out. But anyways, the fighting only grows more intense. The events of the H.E.P in the last book need resolving before the story can begin, so let's quickly go over the last book. Book 14 opens with Nestor hearing the roar of battle from his tent. He hurries outside to see what's happening, and soon meets the other Greek captains to figure out what can be done. Agamemnon speaks and proposes a simply horrible plan, and Odysseus and Diomedes give their own responses. Eventually, a plan is settled on, and the leaders head out to put it into motion. The motion is that they move along the rear lines to rally the troops. And with Poseidon lending aid, the mood lifts a little from outright despair. The scene then shifts to Hera on Mount Olympus. She notices that Zeus is on Mount Ida and decides to take advantage of the moment with a clever scheme. Dressed in all her finery, she passes by him on the mountain, and Zeus quickly suggests that they pause for a brief conjugal diversion. But Hera has brought along Hypnos, the god of sleep, with orders to knock Zeus out once the deed is done. As soon as Zeus falls asleep, sleep alerts Poseidon, who pushes the Greeks forward with renewed energy. In the surge of fighting, Ajax hurls a massive rock at Hector and sends him crashing to the ground. The battle carries on with especially brutal fighting, and the book closes with another call to the muses. Oh, those gods. Always getting up to mischief, aren't they? The H.E.P is a comic scene meant to lighten the mood and contrast the lives of God with those of mortals. And also, who am I kidding? I was trying to weave in a bit somehow about how you should subscribe, but I can't come up with anything. So, please subscribe. I'll do better next time. Maybe I'll make a pun or something, but writing is hard, guys, so come on, cut me some slack. Anyways, I'll quickly refresh your memory on Book 15 before we begin the analysis. Book 15 opens with Zeus reawakening after a really good nap. And quickly surveying the scene, Hector is wounded and the Achaeans have temporarily reversed the momentum. Zeus threatens Hera, reminding her of a previous time she disobeyed him, but Hera pulls the shaggy defense. It wasn't me. Zeus is in a good mood, and I wonder why. So he let it slide, and also reveals to us the remainder of the plot. Hera then returns to Mount Olympus, reintegrates with the gods, and provokes Ares to almost going down to Troy. In the meantime, Zeus sends Iris to tell Poseidon to cease his assistance towards the Achaeans, and he sends Apollo to revitalize Hector. With Hector revitalized, the Trojans sweep back past the wall and resume their assault with fresh vigor. The Achaeans are dismayed to see Hector again, and Nestor prays to Zeus to save them and give them a sign, which he does. But the Trojans mistake it for a sign for themselves and are even more emboldened. The intensity of the fighting is heard by Patroclus, who is tending to Eurypylus, and this finally sends him on his way to Achilles' tent. The fighting goes back and forth, and Ajax and Teucer are protecting the ships from the decks. In an obvious favoring of Hector, Zeus breaks Teucer's bowstring as he tries to fire at him. Hector notices this and further rallies his troops, and Ajax does the same. The fighting grows very intense and builds until Ajax is forced back and Hector grabs one of the ships. One thing that really struck me when rereading this book is the buildup of tension. The fighting really kicks up another notch in this book, and the poet does much to capture the desperation of both sides. I think it's clear that the story is moving towards a pivotal point. What that is remains to be seen, though. But usually when the poet gives especially harsh or extreme examples, it's because they want to surpass them later on in the story. So keep that in mind. But without further ado, let me dive right in. The book opens with the Achaeans effecting a temporary reversal against the Trojans and forcing them back across the ditch. This, of course, was caused by Zeus's temporary slumber, which is now about to end. He sure wasn't asleep very long, it seems, at least in narrative time, but as soon as he is up, he takes in the situation and realizes Hera's trick. He is upset, mostly at having his plans temporarily derailed, and that Hera has disobeyed him. In his anger, he describes a previous time when Hera disobeyed him and impeded Heracles on his journey home. And this happens to be the same event that Sleep mentioned to Hera in the previous book. Let me go over what Sleep said to Hera in book 14. This is Sleep speaking, quote, "For another time before this your command goaded me on, that day when Heracles, that overbearing son of Zeus, sailed from Iliad, having utterly sacked the city of the Trojans. I did indeed lull to sleep the mind of Zeus who wields the Aegis. My sweetness poured over him, but in your heart you planned evils for his son. You stirred blasts of stiff winds across the sea, and caused him to be carried away to fair-settled coasts. Apart from all his friends, and awakening Zeus raged violently, hurling us gods through his halls, and seeking me above all others." End quote. And now we have in book 15 Zeus's description of what he is going to do to Hera, and what happened last time. I will quote it in full, quote, "Now your evil-making, hopeless one, your deception, Hera, has put a stop to shining Hector's fighting and driven his men to flight. I rather think that, once again, you may be first to reap the profit of your grievous evil scheming, and I will lash you with strokes of lightning. Or do you not recollect that time you were hung on high, and from your feet I let 2 anvils drop, and around your hands I threw fetters of infrangible gold? And you hung in the clear sky above and in the clouds below. And the gods across high Olympus could not bear this, yet they stood around powerless to set you free, and if I caught hold of anyone, I would seize him and hurl him from the threshold of Olympus, so that he came to earth with little strength to move, and not even so did unceasing grief for godlike Heracles let my spirit go. But you, winning over the storm gales with the aid of the north wind, had swept him into the murmuring sea, plotting your evil schemes, and then carried him away to well-settled coasts. And there I rescued him myself, and at once led him up into the horse-grazed pastures of Argos, he who had endured many struggles as it was. And I will remind you of these things again, so that you give over your deceptions, and see if they will protect you, your love-making and bed, the bed where you lay, coming from the gods to deceive me." End quote. So a couple of things going on here. First, note the continuation of the Heracles story from the last book as told by Sleep, and this book as told by Zeus. I think it is repeated here to emphasize that Hera does know the consequences of her actions. Zeus also mentions the punishment inflicted upon her last time this happened, which is a rather peculiar and strange one. He attached 2 anvils to her feet and bound her hands and then hung her in the sky. This practice was a punishment used on slaves in the ancient world, and the added weight to the feet was meant to make it even more unbearable. Besides this being an absolutely bestial form of punishment by Zeus towards his wife, there are some more interesting facets to this tale. Why anvils? Why not a mountain or the earth itself? The mention of 2 anvils, specifically in the Greek akmonos duo, literally 2 anvils, raises some questions. Walter Leaf, in his commentary on the Iliad, suggests that anvils were chosen by the poet because they are the heaviest single pieces of metal that can be moved at the time. But I find this unsatisfactory. Surely Zeus, king of the gods, could move something larger. One theory states that in earlier stories of the sky and the earth, the word anvil, Greek akmonos, actually meant thunderbolt, and the punishment originally meant that Zeus would lash her with thunderbolts. From there, the meaning of akmonos shifted to mean anvil, and the poet singing the tale used this bit and interpreted it as 2 anvils weighing her down. This theory feels plausible, but further linguistic analysis of akmonos reveals that the arguments for it meaning thunderbolt are very weak. Instead, the answer becomes even more complicated. In his article, The Hanging of Hera and the Meaning of the Greek akmon, Miles C. Beckwith establishes the thesis that akmonos and the accompanying duo numeral signifier actually harken back to a pair of Phrygian deities who represented the heaven and the earth, one named Akmon and the other Doyanta. Over time, through the development of the underlying oral tradition, the phrase changed from meaning heaven and earth, corresponding to each of the gods' names, to being shortened to a phrase like the 2 heavens. Next, it contracted further to a phrase meaning heaven and its twin, and finally, it became something very similar in form to the akmonos duo that comes down to us today. The poet who composed our Iliad quite clearly meant it to be anvils hanging from Hera's feet. But within the words, we can suss out and sense a different meaning, one where Hera was suspended between heaven and earth. And this heaven and earth was the colloquial sense of heaven and earth by invoking the use of the two Phrygian deities. I've certainly trimmed much of the analysis over these terms from Beckwith's article, so if you're interested in reading it yourself, I have included a reference to it in the episode description. I always wonder how many lost phrases and words there are lurking in the Iliad like this. The poets who contributed to its creation over the many hundreds of years all would have made their mark, and the use of akmonos and duo seems to be one of them. Anyways, Zeus's threat to Hera to chain her up, however he intends her to be strung, is very frightening and real, and Hera realizes the threat. She replies to him rather interestingly, swearing on the river Styx that, quote, "Not through my doing did Poseidon who shakes the earth distress the Trojans and Hector and help the others, but it seems his own spirit stirred him and urged him." End quote. Now, according to the poet Hesiod in his Theogony, breaking an oath sworn by the river Styx will cause a god to lie breathless, spiritless, and voiceless for a full year, unable to take ambrosia or nectar. And then, after that year, will be forced for 9 years to live apart from the other gods. A very harsh punishment for these gods. So why then does Hera swear by the Styx, and with somewhat flimsy reasoning at that? Well, dear listener, because she is actually telling the truth. Let's remember back to Book 14. Hera on Olympus spied Poseidon hidden amongst the Greeks and encouraging them. She went and convinced Sleep to help her, and then seduced Zeus. Sleep then went to Poseidon and told him Zeus was asleep. But the key thing is that Hera never instructed Sleep to go to Poseidon. He seems to just have intuited it himself. Thus, Hera's oath to the Styx is true. Nowhere along the way did Hera tell Poseidon to interfere. She merely, and quite cleverly, saw Poseidon in place and then distracted Zeus at the correct time. Sneaky, sneaky Hera. Zeus's reply to this oath seems to show that he believes her, as it says, quote, "The father of gods and men smiled." He obviously knows Hera's oath is true, but that she has gotten the outcome she desired regardless. And hey, maybe Zeus got the outcome he desired regardless anyways. Zeus then strongly suggests that Hera return to Olympus, because if she were to return there sharing his view, as he puts it, then the other gods, including Poseidon, would soon agree to follow Zeus's commands. He also says upon her return to send Iris and Apollo to him, so Apollo may breathe strength into the wounded Hector, so that he may roll the Achaeans back, killing many. The king of gods and men also says that because of this hard fighting, Achilles will send out Patroclus, whom Hector will kill in front of Ilion, only after Patroclus has killed many Trojans, including Zeus's own son Sarpedon, and that Achilles, enraged at the death of Patroclus, will then kill Hector. After this, Zeus says there will be a retreat away from the ships, and the fighting will be more even, until the Achaeans capture steep Ilion through the designs of Athena, by which he means the Trojan horse. And this is, well, exactly what happens. Spoiler alert, Zeus, geez. Though this is an interesting device by the poet. Several times before, the poet has just revealed the plot to us, at least up until a certain point, and now the finale is laid bare before us. What is the effect of this? Well, I would say that if this were a modern work, the effect would be disappointment. We place a lot of weight on the revealing of the plot, and that if it is known beforehand, it's less enjoyable. I know many people that are very spoiler sensitive and don't want to know anything about a show or movie or book that they haven't consumed yet, lest it spoil it for them. This is very common in the internet era, but I generally push back against this. A piece of art should be appreciated as a whole, not for how it is perceived sequentially, linearly, through the act of viewing it. In any case, before I start a full rant, here are the other times in the Iliad where the poet has revealed a portion of the plot to us. In Book 1, Zeus promises to Thetis that he will let the Trojans win for a while to bring honor to Achilles. Later, in Book 4, the conversation between Zeus and Hera results in Zeus agreeing that Troy will be destroyed, with the caveat that Zeus may destroy 3 of Hera's favorite cities if he wishes to. In Book 8, Zeus says that Hector will not cease fighting until Achilles is roused, and on that day when they are fighting over the body of dead Patroclus. And now we have in Book 15 that Hector will kill Patroclus after he has been sent out by Achilles, and then Achilles will kill Hector, and then Troy will fall to Athena's trick. Notice how the poet has leaked a little bit more information about the plot each time, stringing us along. At each moment, we wonder how the present circumstances will resolve into what Zeus has decreed and what we know. And then as we get further, it's updated again, and so we're strung along a bit longer. For an ancient audience who knows how this would all end, this is how the tension is kept high. How will the current events lead to what they expect? Note that if Zeus didn't say any of this, then the audience is kind of lost, floating. They know that Troy must fall, Hector must die, but they don't really know how they're going to get from where they are to where they will be. Thus, the poet feeds it to us piecemeal, and the effect is a heightening of the tension, as if the narrative is pulled tighter each time more of the plot is revealed to us. For this reason, I always say that with the Iliad and the Odyssey, it is important to know the ending before reading it, because that is how they were intended to be approached. The greatest pleasure upon reading them is not from the first time, it is from the nth time, after the story is absorbed in you and you begin to appreciate the fine references and structures within. Okay, rant over, let's get back to it. Hera makes her way back to Olympus, seemingly content with the admission that eventually Troy will be destroyed. I always wonder if Zeus could have saved himself some headaches if he had just explained this all to the other gods. But then again, if we were to apply rationality to any of their behaviors, all of this sort of falls apart. As Hera travels to Olympus, there is an interesting simile about how she travels there. Quote, "So he spoke, nor did Hera the white-armed goddess disobey, but made her way down from the peaks of Ida to high Olympus, as when a man's thought flashes after he has traveled much land, and in his sharp mind he thinks, 'Would that I were in this place or that,' and he wishes for many things, so swiftly did Lady Hera fly in anxious haste." End quote. The speed of a thought as something extremely fast and light reminds me of a Norse myth with a similar premise. To summarize very briefly, Thor, Loki, and two boys, Thialvi and Roskva, go to the house of the Utgard giants, who say that each of them must perform a feat if they are to stay there. Thor and Loki both perform their feats, and then young Thialvi says he will challenge anyone to a race. He ends up losing the race, although it is very close. But then, at the end of the story, it's revealed that the feats they were performing were against near impossible adversaries. Thor, who tried to lift the giant's cat, was actually lifting the world serpent Jormungandr. Loki, who lost his eating contest, was competing against Wildfire. And Thialvi was competing in a race against thought, with the insinuation being that thought is the fastest thing of all because it is instant. It's a fantastic myth, but note the common sentiment in both cultures that thought is something light and swift. I think it just makes sense because, in a sense, we can travel very far in our minds very quickly and picture things in such detail that it is as if we are there. Man, I love comparative mythology. After Hera arrives on Olympus, she is said to ignore the rest of the gods who greet her, but accept a cup from Themis of the lovely cheeks. This is significant because Themis is the god of customs, divine order, or right action. By accepting the cup from her, Hera is showing that she is now willing to play by Zeus's rules and that the divine order will be maintained. She does this, but begrudgingly so. She sits down and says, "They are fools for trying to stop Zeus, that he is so mighty and powerful. Why do they even bother? Yada yada. We might as well just accept that Zeus will send misfortune to each of us." And then she reveals that Ares' son Ascalaphos has been killed, which Ares did not know about. Tricky Hera. Even if she herself cannot go against Zeus's orders, she can still convince someone else to do it. And so she goads Ares on, quite easily it appears, by delivering the news that his son was killed in battle. It's important to note that Ares' son was fighting on the Achaean side and was speared by Deiphobus in Book 13. This implies that Ares would switch allegiance from Trojan to Achaean to exact his revenge? Now we can see the clever maneuvering by Hera. Well, Ares flies into a rage and nearly descends down to Troy, but Athena stops him, mentioning Zeus's wrath should he do so, and how none of them would be safe, guilty or not guilty. Next, Hera does tell Iris and Apollo to meet with Zeus on Mount Ida. Zeus first instructs Iris to bring word to Poseidon, and then instructs Apollo to rejuvenate Hector. Here we see a drawback of the oral poetic form. Simultaneous events must be presented in sequence. This is just a byproduct of the medium, much in the way that sitcoms have to invent reasons for their characters to be around each other all the time, such as affording massive apartments in New York, or going to a bar every single day. So too does the poet have to describe sequentially events that are really taking place simultaneously. I wouldn't say that this detracts from the storytelling in the Iliad. The poet obviously has worked around this limitation, but in some instances such as this, it is visible to us at least. Anyways, Iris brings Zeus's message to Poseidon. Well, it's a threat, really, saying that Poseidon must withdraw or face the possibility of meeting Zeus in battle. Poseidon is upset at this, stating that the three brothers drew their lots and Poseidon was given the sea, Hades the underworld, and Zeus the sky, and so he shouldn't tell Poseidon what to do on Earth. That's not where he rules. What I find interesting about this is that Poseidon is appealing on logical, almost legal grounds, as if this could work? Surely he knows how Zeus has acted in the past. Perhaps this is his way of showing his frustration in a safe manner. Iris, the wise messenger, asks Poseidon if this is really what he wants to relay to Zeus, adding that the horrible furies, the spirits of retribution that come after oathbreakers, and those who slay their family members, always attend the elder born. This slight pause offered by Iris allows Poseidon to, reevaluate his prior statement, and he begrudgingly complies. We have seen the messenger augmenting the contents of the message they are relaying before in Book 9, when Odysseus took Agamemnon's offer to Achilles and Achilles' response back. When Odysseus delivers the list of gifts, he cleverly omits Agamemnon's demand that Achilles bow to him, knowing this would mean Achilles would instantly reject the gifts. On the return, Odysseus alters Achilles' official response to Agamemnon, saying that Achilles is leaving the next morning, when in actuality, Achilles had settled on making the decision to leave next morning, and that he would not fight again until Hector reached his own ships. Both times, Odysseus alters his message to fit the receiver of it, to maximize the chance of its success. But why do I mention this alongside the Iris episode? Well, both messengers try to fit the reply they are carrying to the receiver. Notice, Iris has not overstepped her bounds of authority here. She simply asks, "Are you sure?" and provides some context for what Poseidon is about to do. Odysseus doesn't double-check with Achilles on what his reply should be, but takes it into his own hands and delivers only the essence of the message to Agamemnon, that Achilles has threatened to leave. If he mentioned all the other things Achilles included in his reply, things would be a lot worse off, just like if Iris had relayed Poseidon's original reply. In both instances, the messengers are smart enough to try and change the message they have to bear, to align things more with their own interests, that being mostly self-preservation, it seems. Iris seeks to keep the divine order intact and prevent a violent confrontation between Poseidon and Zeus, which would surely be disastrous for everyone. Odysseus seeks to bring about the reconciliation of Agamemnon and Achilles, which is necessary for them to win the war. Just some interesting parallels I noticed between the heroes and gods. Anyways, after Poseidon returns to Olympus, Zeus then instructs Apollo to attend Hector. Hector wonders which god speaks to him, and mentions how he thought he was going to die that day. Apollo says it is he who even before watched over Hector and will now smooth the way towards the ships for their chariots. Quite literally, we'll see. He then revives Hector and breathes great strength into him, and we are treated to two great similes. Quote, "As when a horse confined to a stall, fed on barley at the manger, breaking his tether, runs with pounding feet across the plain to immerse himself in the fair flowing waters of his accustomed river, triumphant, and he holds his head high, his mane streaming about his shoulders, emboldened by his beauty, His knees bear him lightly to the pasture and places horses love. So did Hector lightly move his feet and knees, urging on the horsemen, since he heeded the god's voice. And as dogs and rustic men give chase to a horned stag or wild goat, one that the wild rock cliff or dusky forest protects, which, after all, it was not their destiny to catch. And drawn by their shouting, a full-maned lion appears in their path, and immediately he turns the pack of them around for all their eagerness. So the Danaans for a while followed, always in a body, striking wounds with their swords and two-edged spears. But then they saw Hector running through the ranks of his men. They were filled with terror, and the heart in all sank to their feet. End quote. Oh, so good. Such a vivid description of the horse breaking free, bearing himself lightly. There was another similar horse simile in Book 6 with Paris as he ran from Troy back to battle. But there, the horse was chasing female horses, which fits Paris oh so perfectly. I like that the two brothers of Troy get similar similes, and both so full of motion and energy. Well, no sooner has the poet finished one, have they launched into another. This is one of those similes where at first we are unsure of who the tenor is. At first we think that Hector is the goat or stag and is being pursued by the hunters. But then we're told he is the lion they have attracted. Or is he both? I think the present circumstances show that Hector was the stag when he was wounded, but has now become the lion through Apollo's reinvigoration. There are many similes like this in the Iliad where the exact tenor is not immediately clear, but this ambiguity while listening to the simile only enhances its artistry, as it was a way for the poet to match the simile to the present situation, giving it depth and nuance. The poet intends to build Hector up in this way, as any advancement in the story means a step closer to Hector's death, and the poet wants it to be impactful and memorable. We return to the Achaeans, who immediately notice Hector's return. The Trojans mass against the Achaeans, and Apollo shakes the aegis against them, causing a rout. The Trojans go on the offensive, and there are a series of killings by their sides in rapid succession. Hector rallies his troops, they set to their chariots, and now comes time for Apollo to clear the way for them. This, possibly more than any other passage, illustrates the physical differences between the gods and men. Quote, "And at the front Phoebus Apollo, without effort, dashed the sides of the deep trench with his foot, and threw them down in the middle, and made a long causeway for passage, in width as far as a spear is cast, when a man makes trial of his strength. There the Trojans poured forth in battle ranks, Apollo at the front, holding the prized aegis. He threw down the wall of the Achaeans without effort at all, as a child tumbles sand by the sea, who when in his childish ways has made his play castle, sweeps it away again with his feet and hands, still playing. So then you, Apollo, to whom we cry aloud, destroy the work of much toil and hardship of the Argives, and arouse the terror of panic among them." End quote. The wall that the Achaeans toiled to make, that Poseidon was jealous of, for he thought it might overshadow the walls of Troy that he and Apollo made, that wall is dashed aside so easily by Apollo. I love the imagery of him using his foot to fill in the ditch. It's very visceral, and the sandcastle simile of the child is top-notch. The poet always brings the everyday, peaceful life right to the heart of the fighting, and this is an example par excellence. I also find it very convenient for the plot that the wall is no longer an obstacle. Before, it was such an epic moment in Book 12 when Sarpedon tore down the wall, and also when Hector breached the gate by throwing a boulder. Both godlike feats we should now realize. If we were to have another struggle for the walls, then those scenes would be diluted in our minds. But the poet smooths those over by waving his hand saying, "The gods did it," which preserves the achievements of Sarpedon and Hector, and is also very convenient for the plot. As now the Trojans surge through the new opening, the men raise their hands in prayer to the gods, and Nestor himself prays the hardest to Zeus. What is interesting is that Zeus responds with a peal of thunder, which we're told is a sign that he is heeding Nestor's prayers. But the Trojans mistake the peal of thunder as a sign for them, and the assault of the Achaeans even harder. There's a dramatic irony such as this through all the Iliad, where the Trojans believe they can win, but the poet tells us and shows us, and the audience themselves know, that the Trojans can never win. The simile to bridge the action next is apt, as it describes the Trojans as a wave descending on the side of a ship, very literally foreshadowing the massive Trojans about to bear down on the sides of the Achaean ships. Suddenly, though, the narrative shifts to Patroclus tending to Eurypylus. Remember, he has been there since he left Nestor's tent in Book 11, and apparently he has been salving Eurypylus' wounds and keeping him company ever since. Patroclus sees the Trojans surging over the wall and strikes his thighs with the flat of his hands and spoke in grief, quote, "Eurypylus, despite your need, I can no longer linger with you here, for now a great battle has arisen. Let your retainer continue to attend you, but I am going to hasten to Achilles so as to urge him to fight. Who knows, if with help from some god I might stir his heart, winning him over, for the persuasion of a comrade is a worthy thing." End quote. And that is all we hear from Patroclus in this book. This feels to me like a race against time sort of set up by the poet, like, will Patroclus convince Achilles to rejoin the fighting in time? Find out next week on the Iliad. That's how I think the ancient bards would have done it. But the effect is apparent. It cranks the suspense up another notch, and it will rise further in this book. But back in the fray, Hector immediately re-engages Ajax. I must highlight his courage here, since Hector himself recently admitted that he was nearly killed by the stone Ajax hurled at him. But here he is again, fighting the strongest Achaean warrior, mano a mano. The fighting is extremely even, but we are told that Ajax spears Hector's cousin, who is wielding a firebrand. The race is on to torch the ships, and we can sense the Trojans' frenzied desperation, so close to their goal after 9 years. There's a cameo by Teucer the archer again. Ajax and him are never too far apart, and Teucer takes aim at Hector. But in a clear show of divine favor, Zeus snaps his bowstring. The exasperated Teucer tells Ajax that it was a fresh string, strung only just this morning. It is clear to the heroes that Zeus is favoring Hector. We know this because Hector says so himself. Before I quote him, I must admit that the tail end of this book contains some truly great exhortations from Ajax and Hector. They really lend to the feeling of pitched battle that is building. Here's Hector's speech where he highlights Zeus's divine favor. Quote, "Trojans and Lycians and Dardanians who fight at close quarters, be men, my friends, and recollect your fierce courage among the hollow ships. For I now have seen with my own eyes the shafts of their best archer thwarted by the hand of Zeus. Easily seen is Zeus's help to men, either those in whose cupped hands he places victory's glory, and those whom he lays low and is not minded to defend, as now he lays low the might of Argives and stands by us. Come, fight to the ships together, and he of us who, struck or stabbed, meets his fated death, let him so die. There is no shame for a man to die fighting to defend his fatherland, but his wife is safe and his children after him, and his home and property are undefiled, if the Achaeans depart with their ships for their own fatherland." End quote. Chills. I'd be interested to see how many times Hector starts his speech with Trojans, Lycians, and Dardanians who fight at close quarters, because it feels like a lot. This is because it forms a single line of hexameter, and the poet has it locked and loaded to use when he needs Hector to shout to his men. The bit about the fatherland harkens back to Hector's sharp rebuke of Polydamas, omen of the bird sign that Hector ignored in Book 12. Comments like this about the fatherland have made Hector very popular throughout history, and this defend the fatherland quote from him in Book 12 became the slogan for some Greek military units in the modern era. To this quote by Hector, Ajax replies, perhaps a little bit less eloquently, but by no means less desperate. The fighting continues with some back and forth until a certain Dolops is killed, and Hector shouts at Melanippos to save his cousin. Wait a minute. Melanippos. Haven't we heard of him before? Oh, that's right. He was one of the several shot by Teucer in Book 8, where he struck them down to the life-giving earth. So what's he doing here, alive? Well, dear listener, this is what has been called historically a Homeric nod, as in the great poet Homer occasionally nods off a bit, and some heroes come back to life. There are actually many such heroes that appear to be killed twice, but Melanippos did something to earn the ire of the poets, because he will be killed a third time by Patroclus in just the next book. Now, you may think this an egregious error on part of such an esteemed work of literature, but honestly, with oral poets, this sort of thing happens often. Albert Lord describes in his Singer of Tales, which is absolutely eye-opening by the way, I cannot recommend it enough, that oral poets often make such mistakes, or even worse ones than simple repetitions or omissions. They fall into the dreaded plot hole. But I won't give such an example here. Just know that such inconsistencies such as poor Melanippos exist because the Iliad was an oral poem. I do imagine that the poet must have felt bad about killing Melanippos 3 times, though, because he does give him an apostrophe, one of the only 3 characters in the poem to be addressed as such, that is. The poet says, "So toward you, Melanippos, steadfast Antilochos leapt to strip your armor." Lovely. The other characters who receive such attention from the poet are Menelaus and Patroclus, so I find it a bit strange that Melanippos does as well, but no matter. The Trojans continue their advance, and we are told the precise limits that Zeus will allow the conflict to reach. Quote, "For Zeus' heart desired to give glory to Hector, son of Priam, so that he would hurl upon the curved ships demonic and unwearying fire, and bring to fulfillment the whole extravagant prayer of Thetis. So all-devising Zeus awaited this, to see with his own eyes the blaze of one ship burning. From that point he intended to effect in turn retreat of the Trojans from the ships and give glory to the Danaans." End quote. Again, the poet clearly lays out what will happen in the future, and then proceeds to slowly, methodically take us there. Such asides leave us wondering how it will be accomplished. The poet then focuses on Hector for a bit, lavishing him with some amazing similes, ones that imply both how powerful Hector is and how strong the defense of the Achaeans is. The Trojans surge once more as Hector kills one Periphetes, and this prompts old Nestor to reassure the troops. Things begin getting desperate as Athena shines bright light amongst the warriors, so that even those in the back can see Hector, and this causes a panic. Even great Ajax is worried, and he moves from fighting on the ground to the decks of the ships wielding a long sea pike. Ajax also receives a great simile here, quote, "As when a man who is skilled in the riding of horses has harnessed 4 horses together, chosen from many, and speeds out of the plain toward a great city, racing along a public road, and many watch him in wonder, men and women, and without hesitation and always sure-footed he changes, leaping from one to the other, and the horses fly along. So Ajax ranged upon deck after deck of the swift ships, with his long strides, and his voice reached the clear sky of heaven." End quote. I've always loved Ajax's simply cinematic defense of the ships, leaping from deck to deck, spearing Trojans like fish, shouting for the men to have courage, all while the Trojans bring fire and Athena fills the battlefield with brilliant light. Another interesting thing about this simile is the 4 horses harnessed together, which is called a quadriga. It's interesting because only one hero in the Iliad commands a quadriga, and that is Hector, tamer of horses. Ajax, as the tenor of the simile leaping across the quadriga, fits very closely to Ajax leaping across the decks of the ships above and out of reach of Hector. Lots of neat similarities between those two. Anyways, the battle reaches its highest point, and the poet takes a moment to address us, the audience, that we would have thought the men tireless, unwearying as they faced off in battle, so vehemently they fought. Well, and then it finally happens. Hector lays hold of the stern of a ship, a very specific ship, actually, the ship of Protesilaus. He was a significant character from the very start of the Trojan War and was mentioned in Book 2's catalog of ships. His name literally means first setting forth of the fighters. And he was the very first person to set foot on Trojan soil. But unfortunately for him, there was also a prophecy that whoever first set foot on Trojan ground would be killed. And so he was the first casualty of the Trojan War, slain by Hector. It is a poetic choice to then have the moment that so much hinges upon harken back to 9 years before at the start of it all. Hector does not loosen his grip on the stern and shouts for his men to bring fire. All the while, Ajax desperately wards off the Trojans from the other ships, and he shouts to all to come to their own defense. And the book comes to a close. And that wraps it for Book 15. The plot is progressing slowly. We have seen the outcome of the seduction of Zeus, and while it didn't really change the course of things, it provided some bumps in the road up until this point. I'm sure Hector wishes it didn't happen though, seeing as he was nearly killed. But with a little divine favor, he is back up and at 'em. I mentioned before, during a different hero's Aristeia, that Hector doesn't get to enjoy a proper, well-defined Aristeia. His is a bit more spread throughout the story. He does have some particularly epic moments, his rock toss in Book 12, and now his fighting at the sterns of the ships, where he literally has victory in his grasp, or so he thinks. There is a beautiful desperation about Hector, and the image of him holding onto the ship, shouting for his men to destroy it, him believing himself to be about to save everyone he loves, and save them in the way that he believes he should. Well, it just gets me. The poet really makes it clear the tragedy of Hector. When in the midst of his fighting, shortly after the Melanippos episode, it reads, quote, "For Hector was to be short-lived. Already Pallas Athena was stirring against him, his fated day of death through the might of the son of Peleus." End quote. Early on in this book, Zeus revealed to Hera his plan and how the Iliad will end, and the poet once more reaffirmed this, and then the poet mentions that Hector is close to his death. For us, it cannot be more clear what will happen. And yet we see the heroes fight on, valiantly. Hector still grips the stern and doesn't let go. He can't let go. And I've always wondered how much of him was full of hope and how much was delusion. But I could go on, and this episode is already getting up there in length. I've been reading The Singer of Tales by Albert Lord recently, and I have many thoughts, so I will try and put together an extra episode just on that. The next episode might be delayed, though, as I am expecting my first heir to arrive in mid-May. But don't worry, once the bloodline is secured, I will be able to sail back to Troy and gain Kleos for my father and my new child. As always, though, if you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear even more, please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or follow me on Substack to get all the episodes and anything else I find interesting on the Homeric epics, all for free. Until then, erostai akustoi philoi.